today we're talking about advanced Magic techniques and moves you can do. So some things that might help you become a better Magic player, or just if you know the rules a little bit more, might help you. And we have a Magic judge to help explain some of it on why it works that way.
That helps a lot. Because we are not always 100% correct when it comes to this kind of stuff, so it's nice to have.
And even that being said, even though I am a judge, I still look up majority of these rules just to make sure, because they can be extremely in depth. So,
yeah. So the first one we got is understanding the you may thing. So like the example they give is Somberwell Stag. When it enters, you may have it fight target creature you don't control, whereas Prey Upon says target creature you control fights creature you don't control. So therefore, if you played like Prey Upon, they could then buff their creature, and then yours is going to die, theirs isn't. But if you played the Stag, and then in response to the trigger, it's going to fight, they buff their creature, you can then choose not to fight because it's a May ability. You can just decline to do so.
Yep. May ability, but the other thing about May abilities is because it's optional and it's something that you want to do and you forget to do the trigger, you're out of luck. So that's something to keep in mind with that. A real good example of that is the difference between Soul Warden and what was the other one? It was like
Essence Warden.
Yeah, is it Essence? No, that's just the green one. There's two. There's Soul Warden, and then there's a card just like Soul Warden, but it's May instead of you gain a life each time a creature comes into play. I can't remember what the other one's called, but yeah, that burned a lot of people because it's really easy to forget.
A card that you probably see a lot in Commander nowadays, so it is a May ability, is Rhystic Study 2. That one is a very easy to miss one, and that's one people think that I have to draw. No, you do not have to draw that card. So,
yeah, and Rhystic Study is really dirty too. So,
I love that card.
So you want to pay the one? One of those cards.
You want to pay the one?
No, it's just where you become annoying. Do you want to pay the one?
Do you want to pay the one? Right? You want to pay the one?
Wuthering Tide is worse.
Yeah, Wuthering Tide is pretty awful too.
Oh yeah, every time they draw. Another one here is knowing when to respond to enter the battlefield triggers. So say I play a vanilla creature, like a 1/1, I can only respond to the cast trigger. I can't respond to that entering the battlefield. But if I play a creature with a triggered ability when it enters the battlefield, I can then respond, so the other player can respond to that. So Correct. It's kind of weird. So if I have a ETB that this is gonna I don't know, destroy whatever. Well, okay, I can still blow up your creature then versus letting you play it, not responding at all.
Correct. So this one, I'm going to go ahead and give you the rule spot on it. It's 405 is the entire rule on the stack. That's going to be the best place to get this rule. And basically rule 405.1, this is kind of what directly involves that. When a spell is cast, the physical card is put on the stack. And you can also look at rule 601.2 A, which kind of explains the card itself on the stack. And when an ability activated or triggered it goes on the stack without the card associated to it. And that's where that double response time comes into play. That falls under that passive priority. So if I cast a spell, let's say I cast, I have, what's the little green 2-drop that came out in the life gaining one that enters with the one that enters that gives you a treasure token?
I know what you're talking about though.
Jewel Thief or whatever.
Oh well, we'll use Jewel Thief.
Works, yeah.
So whenever you cast Jewel Thief, so before it enters the battlefield, it's going to go in this imaginary zone that's called the stack. Your opponents, depending on what format you're playing, have a chance to respond to the card before it enters the battlefield. Now, once it enters the battlefield, it's going to have its ability go on the stack separate from the card itself. So if someone wants to counter the ability or destroy the creature, they can. So that's two different instances where priority wraps around the table from one card entering the battlefield.
But with the Jewel Thief, it gives you a treasure token. Even if they blow up the creature, you're still getting that treasure token.
So because they're only affecting the creature, not the effect that's on the stack. So to stop them from getting the treasure token, you would actually have to counter that. And there's only a handful of cards in Magic still that only counter abilities. Sublime Epiphany being one of them.
Yeah, or Stifle.
Yeah, Stifle's the old one.
Sublime Epiphany is the broken one. Get 6 different effects off 1 6-drop.
That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So this next one is one that actually might help you a lot when it does come up. It doesn't come up very often, but when it does, it would help you a lot because not a lot of people know you can do this. But you can overkill something. So say I have a 6/6 and you have 3 devil tokens that when they die, they deal 1 damage. Well, you're going to triple block my 6/6, hoping that I kill them all, and then you're going to deal 3 damage to my 6/6 and kill it. I can technically deal all the damage to just 1 token if I want, so only the 1 dies, and then the other 2 live, which would save my 6/6 then.
Correct. That's one of those rules that Arena. If you go into Arena and if you're playing on Arena, you can set up the rules where you can designate your damage under your controls. But most people don't because it does a lot of the cheat through for you. But whenever you're in combat, this is why everyone says combat's the most complicated step in Magic. You have declare attackers. They declare their attackers. You have your declare blocker step. You declare your blockers. You put all 3 of them on there. Now, the active player or the player attacking can designate what order the creatures are dealt the damage and how much damage is dealt to them. So even if you wanted to, you could do 3 to one, 3 to the other. You're still going to have your creature live. You're going to take out 2 of them. You're not actually going to lose your creature. They still only have 1 devil left. You can assign it however you want, or you can do 5 and 1. You can assign that, but you have to declare it before damage is dealt. Like you have to specify what's going on before damage is dealt, so they're not thinking that's what's going to go on, because we tend to shortcut that step a little bit.
Yep.
And that ruling, just for face value, this is the closest I could find to it. I'm sure there's another one that's a little better, but I could not find it in the short time I had to look. Was excess was under rules 204. So rule 204 120.4, and it's the damage in process, and it gives the 4-part sequence to the damage. Another one also is any kind of ruling over how turns and phases go into effect.
Yeah, in turns and phases, honestly. So when back when I used to play Legacy a lot, I used to play Death and Taxes. And I still do. I still have the deck. I just haven't played it in a while. That was a huge pet peeve of mine, was when people would try to glaze over phase endings, and because the whole point of Death and Taxes is to respond to their upkeep so that you can tap down their lands with Port or something. And they'd always try to glaze over that into their untap stuff, and they'd be like, "Oh, you didn't say anything." It's like, no, you gotta mention your phases. If you don't mention your phases, I can't respond. And it was really annoying.
Mm-hmm.
That happened a few times.
That's one thing as a courtesy I recommend a lot of Magic players do, is whenever they go into their turns, they the beginning of the upkeep saves. It's okay, untap, upkeep, draw. And I recommend people saying that. Even if they're experienced, I recommend saying it just so that your opponents have the opportunity to respond in effect to anything. Yeah. And that's the same thing with combat. I do recommend, okay, I'm going into combat. Yep. Okay, I'm declaring blockers. These are my, or I'm declaring attackers. These are what I'm attacking with. Okay, these are my blockers.
I always go untap, upkeep, draw, untap, up, or entering combat. That's just good stuff to do, because you
almost
never know.
Make it a mantra. It just makes the game a little bit smoother for everyone, and it doesn't feel like someone's getting cut or cheated, and you don't have to do a lot of rewinding.
Yeah, because that's always the worst. To do that.
One way you can kind of combat that a little bit, if they just go, okay, they just draw, Right? As soon as they draw, you could say, wait, on your upkeep, I do this. Like,
And that is on the other player side too.
because
They
then
can
it's on the other player, like, hey, you skipped your upkeep. I can just do stuff here. So,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's also another part of the ruling too. Is technically both players are responsible for the board state, no matter what turn it is. So that is something that both players are responsible to make sure that they are in knowledge of what step and phases they're in.
Yep.
next little advanced thing we got here is double strike doubles your combat deal damage triggers. So, like Blood Mage Vampire, if you give that double strike, when it deals damage to a player, you put a 1/1 counter on it, you'd actually get a 1/1 counter on it twice.
Correct, and this again falls back into that combat step being complicated. And once you add first strike and double strike in there,
Yep.
you have 2 damage steps at this point in time. So in a traditional round of combat, it's just damage is dealt all at once. But whenever you get double strike in there, you have a pre-damage step. I'm going to say pre-damage step. That's not exactly how it's described, but I'm going to say pre-damage step or a first damage step, where the creature comes in and charges first, deals damage, and then you go into a second step that will deal the second round of damage. So, like one of my favorite cards came out with Zendikar is the Angel of Destiny, where she's double strike. She's a 2/4, and it says whenever you deal damage, you and your opponent gain that much life. You're actually going to gain that twice, and if you have lifelink or any other effects, you're going to gain that twice.
Yep.
So it's a very fun mechanic to look at, especially if you're dealing a lot of combat.
Yep. Double strike. A lot of people just think, oh, I just deal, double the damage on like the power. It's like no. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. And with double strike, that one actually, I think I have the ruling here as 510.4. 510.4 goes into depth on double strike and first strike whenever it comes to like attacking and blocking and what goes on with all that kind of stuff and priority and timing and damage and stuff like that. So if you want to look up that rule, 510.4, which you'll hear that number again later.
Yeah, and then what kind of goes into that is the first strike can beat Death Touch. It could be a way to beat it because,
Yep.
like double strike, same kind of thing. First strike it hits first, right? So the Death Touch doesn't even get a chance to hit them.
Correct. The only way it would be able to deal damage is if their toughness happens to be higher than the original damage that was dealt.
Yeah.
But
That's honestly why. And that's honestly why a lot of like first strike or even double strike creatures have like lower toughness, because a lot of times it doesn't matter because they don't get hit anyway.
Exactly. But yeah, so like he was saying, but I lost track of what I was going to say, so we'll just leave that part out.
Yeah, and then the next one is the fact that you can sacrifice in response after blocks are declared. So, like, if someone has a 1/3/4 life, like you can block, and then if it has a sacrifice ability to like search for a land, like secure a tribe elder or something, you can block, and then before damage, sack that so that the creature's still blocked, but they're not going to gain any life because there's no creature for it to deal damage to.
Yep.
Correct. And that one, that ruling is actually going to be 120.3F. So basically what's happening is you've went past the point of declare blockers. Again, we're dealing with a lot of combat step here. So you've walked past the point of blockers. They've assigned the damage. Well, you have a priority passing before damage is dealt. So you declare your blockers, they assign the damage, and then you press priority before damage is dealt, and that includes first strike damage and double strike damage, where you can go, hey, before damage is dealt, I'm going to sacrifice X creature to Ashnod's altar or something other effect. To remove it, and then that creature, now it's assigned to attack this creature that's no longer existing. It was a legal target at the time, now it's no longer a legal target, but the card still is going to affect that way. The only time that damage would still be able to continue is if it happens to have trample, because it was still trample through. Not a common combo, but it does happen.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the next one here is just basically as a defending player, you basically should know when you basically if you do what we're saying and announce through your steps, you're not going to give away excess information then.
No.
Because you're going to only say what you need to say at each specific step time. Versus like if I cheat right and go, okay, I'm attacking you with everything, and then and so I skip the enter combat phase, I skip the whatever. It's like, well, at the beginning of combat, they technically could blow up my stuff, or they could tap down my creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So if I skip ahead, they can immediately go wait at combat and tap down the two. They can kind of time walk backwards if they need to and do what they need to, because I didn't give them the opportunity to do that.
And that gets even more complicated if you're in something like Commander where you have multiple opponents, because then it's just like, oh, I'm going to attack you. It's just like, well, wait, like when you enter combat, another person can react. Or like if you said that if you say you're entering combat but not saying who you're attacking, which is what you're supposed to do, they might react and like blow up your board. But if you just say you're entering combat and you don't say who you're going to attack, they're obviously not going to react until they have to. So it's just good. It's just good etiquette to not skip steps whenever you can.
Yeah, shortcuts can get you in a lot of trouble. I've made that mistake a couple times just playing.
I've learned that the hard way as well from a lot of years of playing.
I'm going to swing with everything. Oh, before you do that, I'm going to play Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah, it's like, oh, wow.
Okay. I had the game, man. Which Cyclonic Rift is a bad example because I could play that before damage is dealt. Anyways, but that was my example.
Yeah.
And then the last like little tip thing on this about the combat is basically it's just saying that you should remove an attacker at the last possible chance, not necessarily, so give them a chance to waste their pump spells. So like if you're like, okay, but so remove it before damage, you can wait that long versus removing it as soon as they attack.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if it has an attack trigger or something, you'd want to remove it, on the entering combat. But
yeah,
just because they might be like, okay, you assign no blocks, okay, before damage, I'll kill it,
Yeah.
Instead of because they might go, oh, you assign no blocks, so they pump it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, here +10/+10. You take like 15 damage.
and another thing you also want to watch out for in that regard too is because you got to keep in mind with Kamigawa being re-released, there's a lot of ninjutsu effects, so they may swing in and then
nasty,
and they could ninjutsu in a card that you don't want to touch you, and you can respond to that ninjutsu.
Right.
So that is another effect. That's kind of why you want to keep your choices close.
Yeah. And the other thing about speaking of ninjutsu is they can do that multiple times in one combat phase too, which is silly.
Even at the end of combat after damage is dealt, because you're still in combat.
Yeah, yep. It's the most one of the most ridiculous keywords.
Oh, but it's so much fun.
Oh yeah, it's dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually I think there's an infinite mana combo in Dominaria Remastered, because like you can use Maze of Ith, your attacking creature that untaps 3 lands if you have Threshold. And so you're just like, okay, because it has tap, untap 3 lands. So it's like, okay, I declare attacks and tap, and then I untap it. Okay, then I tap, and then there's a way to there's another thing that untaps your land, and then you just infinitely man.
So tap, stupid.
It's like, okay.
Them tap dances.
Yeah. And then some interesting things that I thought of that is just some like smart Magic plays is, so a lot of people, they always, default, I'm going to cast an instant, on their end turn or when they attack me to kill their creature. Well, if they're playing blue or something and you have, a Doomblade, it's like, well, you might as well cast it on your main phase if you're going to cast it anyway before they untap if they're tapped out. Because, like, why give them a chance to respond with a counterspell when you can just blow it up now?
Yeah, if your opponents are tapped out, that is the time to do like your big stuff, because they can't react. And, like,
so just because it's an instant doesn't mean you have to play it at instant speed.
Yep,
you play it
at always play it instant
speed if you need to.
So the key thing with instant is when you have priority, you can cast it. Doesn't matter if it's your opponent's turn, your turn. It doesn't matter. And I've done that on Arena several times where I've had, I think, downfall or whatever it is. Is that the instant? Or cut down, which is the instant. And I'll be like, you're playing blue. I don't like that creature. It's gone. Like, bye.
Yeah.
Get
And
out of here.
and the other thing is too is if you already have if you have your plan turned out and you're like, okay, I'm already going to use this. Why wait? Why wait to use that mana? Your best thing to do is try to use your mana efficiently every turn. And if you know they can counter it or there's a potential for counter, that's not an efficient way to use your mana. So I always recommend when they're tapped out, that's when you really want to start playing your board wipes and stuff like that because you're protected.
Yeah, or your big creatures or whatever you want to play.
Unless you got Toski that's uncounterable.
Yeah, there's that.
I love that little
Those
squirrel.
creatures are nice.
Some other things that you help you pick up advanced moves is knowing when to mulligan, right? So know your deck well, know the meta deck well. Know when you should mulligan and when you shouldn't. I mean, especially in like Legacy, right? Like if I'm playing my Reanimator deck, I could mill down to 2 cards if I need to,
Right.
and still make it work.
Yeah, the
So you
main
can
thing
aggressively
there is
mulligan.
that's something you just have to learn. Like it's like knowing how to mulligan and whatnot. Like it varies from deck to deck, and it's just you just have to learn how your deck plays, what your deck needs, how many lands that you need to start with. Like if you got a big mana curve, then you got to have lands in your hand. If you're something like a reanimate deck, then yeah, you could almost run two, like you start with like 1 or 2 and you're probably okay. Or if you're really aggro, like if you're playing like red aggro or something, yeah, you can probably start with 1 land in hand. You'd probably be okay. You'll be fine. But if you're playing like
Red
blue
aggro's only got,
control, you probably want 3 or 4 lands in hand.
And yeah, so mulliganing, that's one of my weakest points whenever it comes to playing. I'm horrible at remembering when I should mulligan.
Yeah.
But like they were saying, if you know your deck, play test it. I think it's MTG Goldfish that will allow you to put your deck in and you can do fake draws.
Yep.
And learn your draws, see the consistency of what you're doing. And a lot of that just takes time and knowledge. Like I have a 5-color Ramos deck on Arena. I can start off as long as I have 3 mana. Doesn't matter what color it is. As long as I have 3 mana in my hand, I can usually do pretty decent. But like my Yorok deck, which is three colors, I can start with 2 mana as long as I have a blue and a black to start. I'm ready to roll.
Yep.
So, and that's all based on that. And also you want to make sure that your mulligan hand or your hand that you have in my opinion, and this is opinionated, at the latest turn to do something, I recommend is turn 2 or 3. You want to be able to do something at that turn at the latest, because chances are your opponent's already going to be playing, especially if you're playing one of the older styles of formats like Legacy, Historic, Commander. They might already have like a Soul Ring or Arcane Signet, and so now they're ramped out, and you're stuck on 2 mana and you haven't done anything, or you're stuck on 3 mana and haven't done anything. So definitely try to make sure your hand has a curve in it as well.
The number of times I've been stuck at like 2 mana or something like that is like the most demoralizing thing ever. It's just like, oh my god.
My computer screen has heard more angry conversations because of that.
It's like I'll be sitting with my deck and I have like my commander out with nothing, and meanwhile like Corey's got a fucking gigantic thing out. Someone's got Blightsteel out already. Someone else has like an army of like dragons or something. I'm just sitting here like with nothing. I'm just like, oh, this is awesome.
You're just like, just kill me next game.
I will tell you, sometimes in Commander, being mana screwed does benefit you because they're like, you're not doing anything right now. And you can be like, and then the build out of nowhere. So it can be helpful in a larger pod, but generally speaking.
Yeah. That's if they're nice and don't kill you, which is always a 50-50.
Yeah, and then another thing I got down is, especially for like limited here, is just knowing card advantage. You always want to try and get a 2-for-1 on your cards or a 1-for-1.
Yep.
You don't want to play a card. You don't want to have to 2-for-1 yourself, right? Or if you play a card that replaces itself, that is also good. Like a card that comes in that you immediately draw a card off of it. like an Elvish Visionary, right? Like that's betting you a board creature and you're replacing it in your hand, so you
Yep,
still have
Visionary
access
is
to more
very, very
stuff.
good.
But
Let's
it really sucks when you have to like group block to kill something because it's like, oh, I'm 2 for 1
Yeah.
myself to get rid of this. Like, but it's still necessary if it's something you really have to remove. But
Yep. And that's the kind of the funny thing is like Force of Will is one of the most powerful cards, but it's a 2-for-1. Like you are 2-for-1ing yourself to get rid of something, but you're doing it for free. That's
can
kind of
definitely be hurtful if you're not ready.
Yeah, it can hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing here is what Stacked was saying before the show here is if you ever have 2 rules out at the same time, one that says you can't do something and one that says you can, the can't always supersedes that.
Correct. So, my examples is Azusa Lost but Seeking. Her ability says you can play 2 lands per turn, or 2 more lands per turn. And I can't think of the counter card to her, but if the counter card's on the battlefield that says you can't play more than 1 land per turn, the can't is always going to be what you follow. Even if Azusa hit the battlefield second, time stamping does not matter at that point. You're looking at static abilities and effects.
Yep.
That's one way to turn off Azusa decks, the landfall decks, is definitely get them to where they can't play more than 1 land per turn. So, and that's a little caveat there. Cut off landfall.
Yeah, that can go crazy quick if you're not careful. So, yeah. It's good to know.
So,
all right, well, that's all I got for today. You guys have any last thoughts or anything you want to chime in with?
I think the biggest thing is Magic is like I think I'm sure I've said this before, is a game that's fairly easy to wrap your head around, like when you're first learning like the mechanics and stuff, but it's hard to master all of the like how all the rules work together, how the stack works, how like all there's it's a very complex game, and it's just you just have to play. Like, don't get frustrated if you're new and you're like trying to figure it out. Like, you just gotta just keep playing, and you will eventually figure it out. It's just a lot of like trial and error and a lot of like it's just learning experiences. Like that's how we all get here, is years of messing up combos and messing up how cards work and all that stuff.
Yeah, the more you lose, the better you get.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is one of the few games where losing actually benefits you because you can go, well, how did I lose? Well, that effect killed me. Okay, cool. So now I know what to look for next time.
Yep.
And one other thing I do recommend, even if you're not a judge, there's an app that I use. It's called MTG Judge Core V2. That's how it's called on Samsung. I think it's called a little bit different, or on Android. I think it's called a little bit different on Google Play, but you should be able to search that and find it. And it gives you a search for every rule, every keyword, every evergreen word, how steps and phases works. It breaks everything down to a detail, and you can search for it exactly. So, like for enter the battlefield, you just search triggers and you look for the one that says enter the battlefield. You can figure out those rules and how those rules are exactly broken down. Another thing is the Gather is a good website to use for like specific card rulings. There was that one that came out with Crimson Vow, the blood token dude that got errated because the way the card was originally written was like he kept the +1/+0. There's no counters for that, so it would have been really difficult to keep up with. It was originally supposed to be till the end of turn. That wasn't put on the card. That's also where you can keep up with errata, such as Heuristic Study got its ruling changed from you may cast this card to play this card, or play this card to cast this card, because you can't play lands or something like that. I can't remember exactly how it was. Or no, it was changed from play to cast because people were playing lands. You can play a land, you don't get the trigger off the landfall.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to keep up with errated cards and rulings on the specific card.
Yep. It's just a lot of nuanced stuff like that. Yeah, and it's like things like difference between play, cast, difference between like suspend and just there's like all sorts of different like little like word keyword differences that are a big deal because they mean very different things. And yeah, it's just stuff you got to learn. It's
Yep.
just part of the
And
game.
some of the mechanics you probably will never run into. It also depends on where you're at. Because I know, like here, one mechanic that I run into a lot is morph. Not
Yep.
common everywhere else, but it's extremely popular down here for some reason. And that's one of those mechanics I'm constantly going, how does morph work? How does morph work? Because it's different. There's morph, and then there's also
Manifest.
manifest, and there's two
Yeah.
different mechanics. So, and they can
Morph's
get
just the
confusing
cool
if you
one.
don't know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's why pretty much every event, I think, or most, have a judge there for you to call. So you can always ask them questions in the middle of a game if you need to. You
Yep.
can even say, like, hey, come over here and kind of whisper to them if you don't want to give away what you're thinking to your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, does this work how I think it does?
And every judge should have some kind of app on their phone for rules questions like that. And the other thing is the judges have a Discord that we use. So if we run into problems, we will always be able to find the answer from another judge that is knowledgeable. So you will always have a true ruling. Even if you don't feel comfortable with it, we can always ask other judges, even if we're a single judge at an event. So that there is no, you don't have to be comfortable. And that's one thing that we try to do is make sure that everything is the same across the board between one judge to another.